I know personally, the comparison I find myself in is so much around the shoulds and where I should be given my age, the type of work that I do, what I think I have to hold myself to. So many of the women who join the Fitness Fix program, I actually think every single one of them has extremely high standards for themselves, myself included in giving this example, but that's a superpower as long as you choose to look at it that way, because it can also be your kryptonite too. It can be the reason that you choose not to do something. Oh, I don't want to track my food because I can't do it to the most absolute perfect degree where I'm weighing everything and mapping it all out and planning it in advance. And if I don't do that, then I won't hit my macros. And if I don't hit my macros, then how am I even going to get to my goals? See how quickly in maybe 10 seconds, I just completely threw this into a spiral that made it seem like tracking my food was one of the most difficult things to do.
Let's link up with Krysta on the Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What's going on, Fix listeners? Welcome back to our latest episode of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and today, just in time for our very last episode for the month of February, if you are listening to this live, we are talking all things self-love, positive self-talk, and just overall the language that you use to speak to yourself. Now, I got the idea for this episode for a multitude of reasons, but it's important to preface this entire conversation with the fact that I am very much recording this podcast for myself. And I'm going to open it up by giving an example of 3 negative thoughts that I had this morning, and even one of which was on my way driving over to the studio to push record on this episode. So I did a couple of quick stat searches, and I think it's really interesting because I couldn't find anything that was 100% consistent, but I did find this. The average person has anywhere, the number of thoughts really ranges, anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Yes, you heard that right, 60,000. That was the upper range. Then I saw something like 6,000. So this is the part that I'm not 100% sure is consistent. But this was the one staggering number that I found that really just blew me away and was consistent off of every single thing that I researched when I did my quick little Google search. 80%, 80 of our thoughts throughout the day, no matter how many we have, that number seems to be a little bit unclear, are usually negative. And I want that to sink in for you because there's a part of me that's that's not that surprising because like I said, I have 3 different examples of probably just in the last hour where I may have had a negative thought, and I'm going to open up and be vulnerable and share them because I owe that to all of you as listeners of the show. But 80%, that's a really big number. That's more than half. And I also think that just opens an opportunity for every single one of us to work on this in some way. Now, it's really important that I preface this with saying this is not an episode on toxic positivity, and I am as real can possibly be, which is why I'm sharing that I need this episode for me just as much as some of you may need this as you're listening to this. But when we acknowledge that more than half the thoughts we have throughout the day are negative, here's how I look at this. And yes, this is a little bit of a positive reframe. Even using the word opportunity as a positive reframe. But oh my God, this is a huge chance to make a change in your life that can be insanely impactful on everything else that you do. So that's what we're going to walk through in today's episode. I'm going to walk you through it. And I want you to ask yourself a couple questions throughout this. Yes, there will be a little prompt Whether I get to it halfway or in the next couple of minutes remains to be seen. But if you are listening in your car, if you are out for a walk, if you maybe happen to be sitting at your desk while you're listening to this and can pull out some kind of notebook, if you're in the other two scenarios and you're driving, please wait, of course, safety first, until you are out of your car. But I want you to either pull up the notepad on your phone, go into the Notes app, or pull out an actual physical pen and paper and really start thinking about, just do a brain dump for yourself of some negative thoughts you might have had in the last hour, in the last couple of days, in the past week. And I'm going to start by sharing a few of mine. So as I'm driving over here, I was rushing from one thing to the next, which is usually my MO these days. And I had just thrown my makeup bag in my car this morning because I knew I would be coming from the gym and then had some client check-ins to get done and would probably be on my computer for a good 2.5 hours prior to sitting down to come into the studio and record this episode. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to take all my stuff that I need, change of clothes, whatever it was. And I threw my makeup bag into my car. And when I went to go open my makeup bag, like 13 minutes before I walked in to record this, I realized I didn't have any concealer. And for those of you who know me and know what I look like, and if you're listening to this and you're maybe thinking to yourself, oh, it's not a big deal, like you look great, you don't need concealer. Think about how easy it is for you to say that to me. But if you or me, you would probably have the same following thoughts that I did. And that was, oh gosh, how am I going to record this podcast episode? I have not gotten the best sleep in the last few days. I feel like I look really tired, just negative, 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 negative. And I actually started laughing. I then texted a friend and was like, there's nothing like forgetting your concealer and part of your makeup bag for an episode that's all about self-love. I felt like in that moment, it was just a sign from the universe that this was the episode that I needed to record. Because to add to that, as I was preparing for this setup and thinking about what I wanted to go through today, I was collecting my thoughts in the car on the way over here and just kind of mapping out where I wanted to take this conversation. And at least 2 times I had some self-doubt where I was like, I don't know if I should record today. Am I really in the mood to record a podcast? My morning, I just wasn't getting into the energy and flow that I wanted to be in. And I really had to convince myself and hype myself up, even though I love doing this and I absolutely enjoy recording podcast episodes, so much so that I wish I had more time in a day to record more of them on a regular basis. But I share that again in vulnerability because I caught myself multiple times needing to kind of give myself that pep talk. And I think that's important because I think often as a coach, and I get this feedback frequently from clients too. And I tend to share a lot about like my fitness journey as a result of that, because my fitness journey has been very up and down over the last 2 years, and something that I can unpack throughout this too. People tend to assume like, oh, Krysta's nutrition is on lock. Oh, Krysta's fitness is on lock. She doesn't skip time at the gym. Trust me, I do. I most certainly do. And there are many days where I come up with lots of reasons that I'm not in the right headspace for a workout, even though I know that once I do the workout, I'll feel better. Or I talk myself out of wanting to do something that I know will bring me joy and bring me happiness. And really, in thinking about this over the month of February, more specifically in the last 2 weeks, in the last week alone, with it recently having been Valentine's Day, that's kind of what prompted all of these thoughts between a couple presentations I gave for the gyms we're partnering with right now through our FYX nutrition challenges here in New Jersey, through conversations on my Instagram stories. I just started thinking about the fact that, again, go back to my example of the makeup. If anybody's listening to this, you're probably like, oh, you don't need it. But if it were you, just nod your head in agreement. I know I can't see you, but I'm positive that most of you would say, for the ladies out there, that you would say, yeah, I don't know if I'd want to record without all of my makeup. And granted, I could still make it work. It wasn't like I had absolutely none at all. But even if I had absolutely none at all, if I'm being totally honest, I am sure I would have told my editor, Tony, oh, I don't know what clips we're going to pick from this episode because I'm not super happy about how this looked or that looked. And it's just so easy for us to do that. And let's go back to that statistic. 80% of our thoughts throughout the day are negative. That is something we all can stand to change. So, in true Fitness Fix fashion, we want to be practical and we want to provide those explanations to help every one of you listeners come up with actual ways that you can maybe, one, catch yourself in the moment of some of these thoughts, but two, recognize why they're even coming up in the first place, because I think that's the part that most of us skip. And therefore, when we have the negative thought, we're not really looking at it from a constructive place to be able to identify the ways to move forward. Now, let's make that a little more tangible. So, working through this example of the makeup saga, we'll call it at this point. There are so many instances where women, whether it's from social media, magazines, whatever you want to blame it on, if we go years back, just like everything that's wrapped up in body image and your sense of self. And this was something that really came up when I kind of pulled my Instagram stories on Valentine's Day, or the day after Valentine's Day, in fact, of how we look at ourselves has just been perpetuated by really, really high standards, comparing yourself to models, again, social media, magazines, wherever we want to like claim this is coming from. But I think social media even more so, because I know personally the comparison I find myself in is so much around the shoulds and where I should be given my age, the type of work that I do, what I think I have to hold myself to. And guess what? There's nothing wrong with having high standards. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So many of the women who join the Fitness Fix program, I actually think every single one of them has extremely high standards for themselves, myself included in giving this example. But that's a superpower as long as you choose to look at it that way, because it can also be your kryptonite too. It can be the reason that you choose not to do something like, oh, I don't want to track my food because I can't do it to the most like absolute perfect degree where I'm weighing everything and mapping it all out and planning it in advance. And if I don't do that, then I won't hit my macros. And if I don't hit my macros, then how am I even going to get to my goals? See how quickly in maybe like 10 seconds, I just completely threw this into a spiral that made it seem like tracking my food was one of the most difficult things to do. It's actually not. And if you have that perspective, that's the exact sort of thing we reframe by figuring out a different approach for you, what works for you personally in your life, wherever you're at, whether that is because you're holding yourself to this degree of perfectionism, or maybe just because you've had bad experiences with it before, so you're showing up with this preconceived notion. Say all of that to say that all of the negative thoughts we have are so rooted in the stories that we're telling ourselves. Now, that statement, the story that you're telling yourself, has been something that I've been sitting on for probably the past 4 to 6 weeks. If you missed episode 90, our last episode featuring Michael Chernow, I strongly encourage you to please go ahead and check it out. We talked about habits. We talked about his company, Creatures of Habit, his oatmeal brand, and it should say lifestyle brand because there's so much more to it than oatmeal. And it was really powerful because he really brought that to light for me, in terms of recognizing that so much of the way we view the world has everything to do with what we're telling ourselves. And we are like the best storytellers in the world. So I can't do it justice in like a 30-second summary. It was a very powerful conversation. So this is a plug to go ahead and go back, mark that episode, save it for another time if you don't have a chance to listen to it right after this one. But can't encourage you enough to go check it out. It's been one of those episodes where I've gotten a ton of personal feedback from clients, friends, people I see in passing, and it's just been really cool. But again, something that's been top of mind, it was one of my biggest takeaways from our conversation, and we recorded it a few weeks ago, and it's been sitting with me since. And it's just crazy how we are so good at convincing ourselves of a certain reality. And if you couple that with the fact that 80% of our thoughts are negative, it's like, okay, well, no shit. Sometimes we really tell ourselves these stories that we get so wrapped up in something that just isn't true, but we're not doing ourselves any favors by then layering on more negativity attached to it. So again, this comes down to the question of, well, what do we actually do about this? So over the course of the past week, I've had the opportunity to dissect this and really reflect on it and then present it to 3 different groups. And one of the activities that I asked all of them to do that I held myself to that same standard and chose to do it too was twofold. So if you have your notes app open on your phone, or if you happen to have a pen and paper sitting next to you, here's the part where I do want you to take some notes. And we will, of course, be sure to put this down in the show notes as well. So I want you to ask yourself the following questions. What stories of self-limiting beliefs, and I'll provide a couple more examples in just a second, am I telling myself? What is something that you tell yourself, whether it's once a day, once a week, maybe a couple times a week, maybe multiple times throughout the month, that is in fact preventing you from stepping into the person that you want to become? And once you establish what those stories are, I then would urge you to do some sort of prompt of some kind of set of affirmations. You could call it an affirmation, you could call it a ritual, you could call it a meditation, whatever you want to call it. You could call it this thing that you do on a daily basis to help you reframe and rewire that story that you're telling yourself. Because again, what's really cool is just as much as we have the power to tell ourselves these relatively negative stories, we also have the power to tell ourselves the positive ones. And just like strength training, just like learning how to track our food, just like moving through the process of achieving our weight loss goals, however that looks for you, a combination of the 2 things I just mentioned, getting more steps in, whatever it is, improving your sleep hygiene, whatever it is that you're committed to checking those boxes. We all know, if you've been around the FYX for a little while, you know how I feel about habits. Again, another plug for episode 90. But we know that through repetition, that's how we step into that person. The same thing has to be true for your thoughts. So this is exactly how we're going to actually get there. So that might look like writing down in a journal, I am, fill it in with an adjective. I am, fill it in with some action step that you want to take for yourself. So again, let me give you a couple examples. So let's say that you are somebody who is just super convinced. I'm sure there's somebody out there listening to this who could relate to this story, because it's the whole reason why we created the entire concept of the Fitness FYX coaching program. You have this story to yourself that there's absolutely nothing you can do. I'm just destined to not lose weight. Or you're telling yourself, I'm at a certain age and this is just the reality of what my body's going to look like. I had this conversation with somebody not even 2 days ago from the time of recording this, that she shared with me, I had this thought, like, I'm almost 50. Should I just reside to the fact that this is what my body should look like, regardless of the way I'm exercising, regardless of the effort I'm putting into meal prepping, trying to show up in the kitchen a little bit differently, making effort around improving my sleep, all those great biofeedback markers we look at? Should I just kind of throw in the towel, so to speak, and accept that no matter what I do, this is the body that I'm going to live with for the rest of my life? First of all, I think that's really frustrating as a coach, because so much of that story was drilled into this person because of the confusion that exists inside of the fitness and wellness industry, of the people out there who are looking to market so many quick fixes to you instead of actually focusing on behavior change. And if you want to know why you are prey to the quick fixes instead of the behavior change, because behavior change isn't sexy. It is a very hard thing to sell. And because it's a hard thing to sell, there's not too many people out there who are necessarily selling it successfully. But I disagree with that, because it's all about how you can package it. And here's the perfect example of how we can rewire that whole story. So we take this person who's saying, I've reached a certain age. Well, this is just how my body's going to be. After children, this is just what I had to go through. For any moms who are listening out there, that's another one that I hear often. is like, well, at least I can justify the fact that I can appreciate this body because this body did give me my children, but the sacrifice that I had to go through is I'm never going to look the way that I desire to look. I think that's totally unfair and is actually just bullshit. And part of the reason I think that is, again, because it's part of that story that, oh, I did X, so the consequence is Y. Oh, I have this role that I'm supposed to play in society, in relationships, in other people's lives, whatever it is. So as a result of that, I just have to accept the cards that are dealt to me. And I just don't think that's true. So how can we rewire that? And how can we rework that? So if you're listening to this and you're like, Krysta, I identify with all those things. I believe all of those things too. Well, here's how we could potentially change that and create a new roadmap for you. When someone says, oh, I'm just destined to have this body no matter what I do because this is what I chose, or when someone says, I'm just so frustrated at this point with trying to lose weight that I'm better off just throwing my hands up in the air because it's too hard or it's too much work, and we come up with reason after reason after reason, instead, let's kind of go that layer deeper. Somebody sharing with me, when I hear that statement, when I hear somebody say, I feel like this is just what's supposed to happen at this point in my life, or I've put in enough work, where we want to take a step back is actually says, maybe is it possible that I should work on being more open-minded? Now, on the surface, you might be like, Krysta, what does being open-minded have to do with being frustrated about losing weight? So here's how I would back into that. You're frustrated because you feel like you've tried every single thing. Is that actually true? Have you truly tried every single thing out there? You've probably tried all the gimmicks. You've probably tried, and I'm not here to bash all these different fad diets, and we know what most of them are, so I shouldn't even waste my breath in naming them, but you've tried what's sold as sexy, what somebody down the street, your neighbor was like, oh yeah, I lost 30 pounds on this. But then did you find out if your neighbor potentially gained those 30 pounds back? If not, maybe a couple more pounds and maybe a few more after that if you check on them 2-3 years later? Because that's the part, that second part of that is actually the reason why that's not working, which is an episode for another day. So the reason why I would then ask you to come up with an affirmation that has to do with being open-minded is because there's probably a few more things you haven't explored yet, and more importantly, haven't explored for long enough, because the secret sauce is that you gotta do things in a way that is actually, one, more sustainable, and two, something you can stick to. That's it. The best diet is the diet that you can stick to. And most of these diets out there were not designed in a way for you to do them beyond those 30, 40, 50, 60 days. And that's really frustrating. I'm frustrated for anybody who comes to me with that problem, because I've been that person too. And I've been that person who's literally said, I'm in a position where I feel like I'm training super hard, but the results of the way I train should result in a different body in the mirror, and it's just not there. So why is that? That's what prompted me to uncover how I was consuming food and how that food fit into my day, my weeks, my weekends, my months, and really try to get a better picture of how all of these different levers that we can pull when it comes to our fitness and nutrition actually fit together. Over the course of 4, 5, now 6 years, that's ultimately developed into what the Fitness Fix program looks like. And what I'm really highlighting right now is actually the first phase of our program. And that is, we call it our find phase. And honestly, it's one of those phases where the more self-limiting beliefs you might be willing to share with us as your coach, but two, the more you stay stuck in it and aren't willing to do an activity like the one I'm describing, the longer you're going to stay there. But if you keep an open mind, and let's go back to that affirmation, you'll probably catapult into our second phase, our fuel phase, where we really look at the way you're consuming food and helping you come up with a way to continue to eat all the foods that you love, removing the labels of food as good and bad. You'll catapult there a lot faster. But at the same time, it's one of those phases where like you can kind of be half in, have one toe in and one toe out, because these self-limiting beliefs are so deep rooted, and ultimately it serves as the foundation for the rest of your program and the rest of your life. Because think about this. If you could get yourself to a place where like you firmly believe that you are really open-minded, how much easier do you think it would be to hear someone suggest to you, like a coach, hey, have you ever thought about the idea of us consistently getting you to a position where we eat more food, so in that time we can improve your stress, we can improve your digestion, we can get more from your workouts, we can help you with your self-care routine, we can help you prioritize you a little bit better, and hey, we can also fuel your body along that entire process so that all of those things look great. Because on the other side of that, if we check all those boxes, is going to be a much easier experience in losing body fat and losing weight in the long run. Does that sound good to you? Okay, sure, maybe like 15, 20 minutes into this episode, it sounds a little bit better, right? But I guarantee if you've never heard, maybe you're brand new to the FYX podcast and this is the first episode you chose to listen to, you're probably saying to yourself, what is she talking about? And that's not really the usual of what I get when I scroll Instagram, when I look on TikTok, and I know because I'm on there too, of the types of programs that are being pushed to me and the types of lifestyles that are being pushed to me. So again, going back to that framework, self-limiting belief, what's the affirmation, so that we can really flip this and start to create a new narrative for ourselves. So maybe it's open-mindedness. If you're the person who's so convinced that you got to this certain stage of life, you've been through X experiences, this is just what it's going to look like for you. The second thing could be that you want to tell yourself a story that you're flexible, because that's something else that I'm super guilty of. I can be really rigid. I have that type A personality that goes along with the perfectionism. And I would even argue that my makeup example is such a good highlight of that in a lot of ways, because for me to say, oh, I shouldn't record this podcast because I don't have my concealer also just shows that I'm like, well, I have to do this thing a certain way. And if I don't do it that way, then I shouldn't do it at all. Crazy. It sounds crazy when I repeat it out loud, and that's also why I'm saying it out loud, because it's just kind of like, come on. There's value that I can still bring to the table that has nothing to do with what I look like, because a lot of you don't even see me when you listen to these episodes if you're on Apple or on Spotify. Yes, you catch the clips on social media, but the bulk of what I'm sharing in terms of value is the way that I'm delivering it, which has nothing to do with my appearance regardless. So can you open yourself up to being a little bit more flexible? Can you start to tell yourself the story that I'm flexible? And then again, let's tie that into the weight loss example. Let's tie that into the transformation example. If you're more flexible, wouldn't you agree that that would then give you the opportunity to be comfortable going out to eat with a bunch of friends on a Saturday night and not feeling like you're looking around at everybody's plates and you have a bunch of plate envy because you ordered chicken and some other kind of vegetable on the side, and everybody else, you're at some restaurant. I'm going to give an example of burgers because I'll never say no to a burger. Everybody else got a burger. This place is known for its burgers, but you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, well, I have to order this chicken because that's going to help me get to where I want to go. Maybe sometimes it does. I'm not going to take away the validity of that statement, because there certainly have been times, depending on what my priorities are, or more specifically what my goals are, that I've said to myself, hey, tonight's a night to order the chicken. Would I have liked to have the burger? Yes. But usually that's because I probably consumed something else for breakfast or lunch or one of my snacks throughout the day where the burger just didn't really fit. And that's how we create flexibility, through the way we approach our diets. So now we have this story that we're telling ourselves that is totally moving away from, oh, I should just accept this as my fate, to I'm open-minded and I'm flexible. And yes, those two things go hand in hand. Other things we could add to that, and this doesn't even need to be a list that's, miles long. So that's something else I really want you to hear if you're going through this exercise. Maybe you just start with 2 affirmations for yourself, Or maybe you just start with one. It doesn't have to be super extensive to get started. It just has to be something that you know, like think about the thing that blocks you the most. Think about the story you tell yourself the most, or the common thread line through maybe your negative thoughts while they're about like different points in your day, or about different instances that you're facing, whether it's about, maybe one's about work and one's about your relationship with your partner, or one is about, your fitness. Chances are the way you show up in all three of those environments have some sort of common thread associated with them. And again, we could take this idea of open-mindedness and flexibility, bring it right into an argument that you're having with your partner. How easy is it for us when we don't agree with somebody to be anything but those two things? So maybe it's a little lesson in that too. A little lesson in communication. Now, if we want to add one more to keep with that weight loss example, let's keep it in 3, because 3 sounds like a nice number. So this person, again, the self-limiting belief, we're going back to it, is at this point, I should just give up. So we have our open-mindedness, we have our flexibility. There's another piece to that is rooted in fear. So the self-limiting belief, one of the themes is the fear. Maybe it's the fear of success. Maybe it's the fear of like, what happens when I actually do finally lose the weight? Maybe it's the fear that, because you have a track record of lots of evidence, whether it was personal evidence or other people in your life who lost the weight and then it didn't stay. Maybe you have the fear of like even stopping yourself before it starts because you're so afraid of your ability to maintain that success. That is totally valid. So if we want to flip and reframe that fear, you tell yourself, I'm strong and I'm committed. Because the fear often leads to the snowball of saying, I'm only going to do this for 6 weeks. Or, I'm only going to do this for 6 months. Or, I'm only going to do this for 30 days even. Or maybe it's even only 2 weeks. I've definitely been through phases where, I'm like going to start again on Monday, And if I really were to look on paper and put the data down and track everything that I was doing, I wouldn't even have a right to be frustrated from week 1 to week 2, because 1, I now have the maturity in my fitness and nutrition journey to know that that's just not enough time to really measure that progress. And my body needs more time to respond to what's actually happening. But 2, I can remove myself 3 months later and be like, okay, wait a second. I said I was going to start over every Monday for 3 months. So I actually didn't really do anything in those 3 months. So do I have the right to feel frustrated? Probably not. And now all of a sudden, we're coming at it from a place that, to me, to say I'm open-minded, to say I'm flexible, to say I'm committed and strong, or let's make it 4. I'm committed, I'm strong. Now you have 4. That sounds like a very open, like literally heart-centered approach to it. You're open and you're willing to receive a different perspective coming from somebody like myself as a coach who is, again, saying, hey, have you thought about trying this another way? I can acknowledge that there's fear associated with that because I've been there too. I can acknowledge that it's really, really difficult to learn to be flexible when so much of literally your personality might be tied up, and I'm laughing because that's so me, might be tied up in rigidity because you like structure. But all of a sudden now we have these tools that we're like, okay, cool, let's balance this out. We like structure, great. Have you considered tracking your food? You might even like tracking your food, even though, again, even that gets a bad rep on social media, because it provides you structure and it helps give you flexibility to eat the different things you have previously thought were inherently good or inherently bad. So now it's like all of a sudden we laid this foundation to be able to propel you into the next phase of the process. And that's ultimately how the dominoes need to fall for you to figure out where you're going next and for you to feel supported in where you're going next. Well, then, of course, that's where working with somebody like a coach can really help you kind of bring that all together. Because so often, again, like I use the example of me saying to myself so many times, like, I'll start over on Monday. If you don't take a step back and really zoom out, sometimes you don't recognize that you're even doing that to yourself. So hopefully the last 25 minutes or so have helped you maybe take a step back for a minute. And I want to pause right here again and just review that exercise for you to consider for yourself. And that is, write down the stories that you're telling yourself, They don't have to be about fitness and nutrition. They can be about anything else in your life because, again, how you do one thing is how you do a lot of things. Some people say everything. And how can we reframe that? If you can do that on paper, I can promise you that throughout your day, when you catch yourself in that negative feedback loop, like I mentioned, when I said to myself, oh, today I had a lot going on. I don't know if like my energy was off or something. I don't know if my mood was just in a place where I felt like I didn't have as much to share. And then I said to myself, wait a second. You've been thinking about this for the last 3 weeks. You've had this conversation with multiple people, both in person, on Zoom, via Instagram, back and forth in your DMs, in your personal life with other people. This is important to you, and you do, in fact, have something to say. And I can tell you guys that compared to when I walked in about an hour ago, I feel so much better. And I feel exactly what I knew would be on the other side of hitting the record button and sitting down and having this conversation. And it's really taking the time to have the couple of minutes, whatever it is. We get so busy. It's really about taking the time to take a step back. Part of the reason that I think we don't even notice how many negative thoughts we have is because so many of us are going from one thing to the next to the next. And we've had other podcast guests on here before that talk about how easy it is to kind of like grow that negative feedback loop because we're not giving ourselves space. We're not giving ourselves the opportunity to just sit with ourselves. Maybe that's because that feels uncomfortable. I know for me, I tend to, when I have some other stuff underneath everything that I don't want to deal with because mentally I'm like, oh, I just have to get through the next thing. Sometimes I do that on purpose because I don't want to deal with whatever might be nagging at my emotions. And I know straight up, the reason why I'm sharing it is to call myself out because it's not the best way to actually move forward in a way that puts my own health at the center of everything. And as someone who's a coach, that should still ultimately be a priority because if you truly want to practice what you preach, you have to start with yourself. So one of the biggest ways that we can start with ourselves is starting to mind the way we talk to ourselves. And if you need another reason to think about it beyond that 80% statistic that really blew my mind, think about the fact that at the end of the day, yes, you have your relationships in life, but think about how much time we do or don't spend alone. Think about how much time you actually spend with your own thoughts. It's got to be a crazy amount considering the fact that you could have as many as 60,000 thoughts a day. At the end of every day, you go to sleep with yourself at night. And you have a responsibility to yourself that if you are somebody who is willing and putting in the effort to take care of how you look physically, you have a responsibility to do the same for yourself mentally and emotionally. And I think there's so much power in language that even me wording it as you have a responsibility sounds a lot different than me being like, hey, you should go do this thing, right? You should, just because I'm this person with a microphone and I happen to have some nutrition certifications. Krysta said it, so you should go do it. No. That's not a good reason, and that's not going to be a long-term driver. That's something that we really try to build on inside of the program too, this concept of showing up for you and your thoughts and the way you talk to yourself is, I can't really come up with another argument or another example, I should say, of why it's so important to show up for yourself or an illustration of how you can actually show up for yourself every minute of every day. And sometimes you're not going to be able to show up for yourself every minute of every day. And that's where that fine line of the toxic positivity comes in. This is not a message to say that you should go about your day and every single negative thing that happens to you, you should be able to be like, oh, nope, reframe. I'm going to change it in 2 seconds. No. Again, to keep it real. Just last week, I was driving to work and I was on my way to the gym very early in the morning and I hit my passenger side mirror against something. It was dark out because it was early. I don't know if it was a garbage can that was in the street. I was kind of close to the curb, but it was 5:15 in the morning and it took a lot of willpower for me to say to myself, hey, I don't want to let this ruin the rest of my day. But I'll be honest and say I fixated on it for a good hour. And that's okay because I did not want that to happen, right? It's totally okay. And we need to acknowledge every emotion for what it is and as it comes up. But would what would really have made that not okay for me to tie back into this argument of how to look at it from the place of your health, if I then said to myself, oh yeah, this happened to my car, so now I'm going to let the rest of my day turn into a bad mood because it happened so early in the morning that, oh, like I'm upset, so I need to go home sooner, which means I'm not going to do my workout, which means I'm not going to prioritize the time that I set for myself, which also means that I might not really be super concerned about what I choose to eat today. A lot of us do that often. I hear it from clients, and I share it with authenticity from personal experience too. So again, that's the part where you owe the responsibility to yourself, where you owe yourself the opportunity to show up for you when you have it. And the very last point, which I personally believe is the most important, so hopefully you've made it all the way to the end of the episode, is in this statement. If you are somebody listening to this and you are looking to make a change, I can also promise you that if you don't go through this foundational step of paying attention to the way that you talk to yourself, but again, specifically the stories of self-limiting beliefs that you're sharing in your own mind, or maybe even in passing to other people, when you lose the weight, when you achieve a new pant size, when you hit certain PRs in the gym, again, all of our goals don't have to just be aesthetic. If you did not take the chance to learn to love and appreciate yourself for exactly where you were when you started the journey, that change in weight, that change in the number on the scale, that change in whatever you're able to put on a barbell for a deadlift, it's only going to satisfy you for a very fleeting moment. And a lot of people don't think that. They're like, oh, I'll be happy once I lose this weight. If you are not happy with yourself, and it's okay to be partially happy with yourself, right? Because if you were totally happy with yourself, somebody could turn around and make the argument to me, hey, but I need that discomfort. I need that unhappiness to drive change. I completely agree. Some of my biggest motivators that have helped me restart a fitness journey have had to do with being at my most uncomfortable weight. And trust me, I was not in a state of happy thoughts, period. Let alone half the time, 80% of the time, just everything I said to myself was extremely negative. I'm grateful for that experience because I think it's allowed me to have a lot of the realizations that I brought forth today. But I also know that if I could go back and do it again, I wish I had a little more compassion for myself because everybody else around me did, but I wasn't willing to give myself that grace. And if I had, here's the thing that I know I would have done. I would have actually started my journey sooner because I would have told myself that, hey, it's okay. You might have been able to do 15, 20 push-ups on your toes a year ago. And now if you can do like 3, that feels like, oh God, like what happened to me? How did I let myself get here? Fixating on how I let myself get here is not going to make the change. So that's the type of negativity we want to move away from. But I now, and everything hindsight's 2020, now it's very easy for me to say that I appreciate having gone through that process. I've shared on episodes before. I also appreciate it because I think it's brought a level of relatability as a coach to the person who is really struggling with trying to make change or who feels like they're starting their journey over again. I see you, I hear you, I identify with you so much. But at the same time, if we can all just make these small points in our day, in our week, even if you do it 3 times a month, even if this is something where you're like, Krysta, I don't think I can commit to this every single day, you don't have to. I have clients who twice a week, they write down 3 wins. So 6 wins total for the week. They do it 2 times. It probably takes them 4 minutes total. And for those who I've seen do it on a regular basis now, I literally see a change in the way they even write inside of the check-in submissions that they send to their coaches every single week. And it's so cool because that's growth that is so much bigger than the scale. That is so much bigger than hitting certain PRs in the gym. That's the kind of growth that will actually stick with you for the rest of your life because it's what it takes. It's the skill set you need that when you face another hard set of circumstances, that'll be in your back pocket to get you through. So I'll leave you with that. Hope everybody from wherever you're listening from, as we always wish you, have an absolutely wonderful day. And if you got anything out of this episode, please do me a favor, share it with somebody that you think might benefit from it. There's a lot of people, like we said, we know that statistic. There's a lot of people who choose to talk to themselves negatively, and maybe this conversation will be the few minutes, even if they listen to part of it, that they need to help them with that reframe. Thanks, guys.